Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Deirdre Wingert, and I have the honor of inviting you to the American School Health Association webinar, Never Have I Ever, Evidence-Based Strategies for Discussing Teen Substance Use. The American School Health Association, the mission of ASHA is to transform all schools into places where every student learns and thrives. The American School Health Association envisions healthy students who learn and achieve in safe and healthy environments nurtured by caring adults functioning within coordinated school and community support systems. We are reminding you to save the date. The 92nd Annual Conference will be in Indianapolis, Indiana, October 4th to 6th in 2018. If you're not a member of ASHA, we encourage you to become a member of ASHA. The benefits are listed on the screen. The benefits of attending the conference, there's school health action, continuing education, ASHA, Career Center, and 4 networking communities. It's my pleasure today to introduce our presenter, who is Mallory DeSalle. Mallory is a licensed mental health counselor, a nationally certified counselor, a medication-assisted treatment specialist, and an international certified prevention specialist. Over the last 15 years, working in mental health, substance abuse, and prevention fields. She has served the field in a variety of roles, including a community prevention coordinator, therapist, substance use educator, and trainer. Since 2008, Ms. DeSalle has been a faculty member within the Department of Applied Health Science in the School of Public Health at Indiana University, Bloomington. Within her appointment at the university, Ms. DeSalle serves the Indiana Prevention Resource Center as the outreach coordinator and lead motivational interviewer, a trainer for the screening, brief intervention and referral to treatment program, and she is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers and listed on the National ATTC SBIRT Trainers Registry. Ms. DeSalle provides MI and SBIRT training to multidisciplinary audiences across the world. Mallory, it is a pleasure to have you present to us today.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. I really appreciate the welcome and the introduction, and I think that introduction takes about as long as the whole webinar, so I very much appreciate your kindness. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today in this conversation with the American School Health Association on how we can integrate evidence-based strategies into our conversations with our students and adolescents about substance use. I know this is a really difficult time of year. I was reminded by some colleagues that this week may be your final week of school. Some of you may still have a long time yet, another month to go. However, I really appreciate all of you being here with us today. So thank you. I hope today is a valuable use of your time. And so I look forward to having this conversation, even asking you how many of you could say, never have I ever had a conversation like this. And so we will get started. I, of course, am Mallory DeSalle, like Deirdre shared with you. And the reason that I'm providing this support for all of you today is because of my background in providing screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment services across the state of Indiana, as well as across the nation. And how I have brought implementation to several different organizations, and we want to bring this conversation into your school district, into your community, into primary care offices. And so we hope that you can provide some of this information to your partners after today's webinar. So I just want to ask all of you, and this isn't a polling question, though there will be several polling questions throughout today's webinar. I want you to sort of have this question for yourself. What do you think of when I say talking to young people about drugs and alcohol? My guess is the first thing that comes to mind is a difficult conversation. Maybe one where the young people that you'll be speaking to don't feel like they're particularly connected to you, or maybe you don't feel like it is really a conversation. You feel like it's a lecture, or you feel like the students or young people aren't really listening, maybe rolling their eyes, maybe not even participating in the conversation. Or maybe the conversation about alcohol use or drug use with students in your school district feels like a disciplinary conversation, or one of a parent laying down the line, or of a principal giving consequences to a student based on dangerous or high-risk behavior. And what we're hoping for is that after today and moving forward, you can also, or perhaps instead of, have this in mind, where it can be a little bit more of a comfortable conversation, one that is less filled with stigma, one where both of you are equals, where both the adults and the students can have perspectives expressed, and it can be a conversation of equality instead of one of power, where one opinion is correct over the other. Today, what we're going to do is talk about an evidence-based strategy called Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment. That is the acronym of SBIRT. We're going to talk about why SBIRT is important and a little bit about the background and the research for SBIRT. I will be sharing some of the ideas on how to use screening tools and screening tool options. Then we'll be talking about what that exact conversation looks like, and that's through the brief intervention. We will talk a little bit about referral to treatment, which always is an important aspect of SBIRT. And of course, why would we do SBIRT if not for the outcomes? What do we expect to see as a result of doing SBIRT? So these will all be the things that we'll discuss in the 1 hour that we have today. At the conclusion of this presentation, there will also be some opportunities for question and answers. And though I would love to be able to tell you that today's webinar will give you all the skills and experiences that you need to walk away and implement SBIRT, the truth is today will be like your first music lesson, where you'll learn what it looks like, what it sounds like, and some of the notes. And I hope to invite you to encourage yourself and your colleagues to get ongoing training after this webinar so that you can experience SBIRT through implementation. So when I do these presentations and I say, hi, my name is Mallory and I work in the field of SBIRT, a lot of people say, SBIRT, what does that mean? In fact, sometimes they even think I'm saying expert. They have a hard time hearing that I'm saying SBIRT. Or sometimes people think SBIRT is said SPIRT. Oh, you work in the field of SPIRT? Or some people even call SBIRT CBIRT. Do you see BIRT? Now, I will tell you that in webinars, I often can't hear the people on the other line. So feel free, if you think I have said something that you think is funny, to put an LOL in the chat box, or even to put an emoji in the box if you'd like. So the truth is that when it comes to SBIRT, you are going to have a lot of people not know what you're talking about. And they might use the acronyms in new and different ways, or you might have to explain what SBIRT is to lots of different people, lots of different partners. And so I'm going to invite you to listen up to what ways you feel like you connect with best so that you can explain what SBIRT is. SBIRT stands for Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment. The truth is that SBIRT is an acronym, but not everyone that experiences SBIRT will experience all of the pieces of SBIRT. Some people will only experience the screening aspect of SBIRT. A smaller number of people will experience both the screening and the brief intervention, while an even smaller percentage will experience the screening, the brief intervention, and the referral to treatment. Before I go in depth into the details of SBIRT, I'd like to ask you a polling question about how much do you already know about SBIRT? So Caitlin, if you could please bring up this poll number 1. So what do you already know about SBIRT? I haven't heard anything about SBIRT, or I know what SBIRT is, but I don't know how to do it. Or perhaps you are informed on what SBIRT is and you understand how to implement it, you just haven't yet. Or maybe there's some of you on the call that have been trained in SBIRT and have already implemented SBIRT in some way. And so we can see right here, there are several of you that are responding that this is your first time really hearing about SBIRT. And so this is a great way to get introduced to it. Some of you have heard about SBIRT and really haven't learned how exactly you might go about doing it. And there's a few of you that have either been informed on how to implement it or are already doing so. So that is really helpful for me to know. If you are one of those individuals that already have been trained in implementation and maybe even have real life experience, I would love for you to offer comments throughout so that you can share feedback for those of us that are learning about this for the first time. All right, thank you, Caitlin. So when we think about SBIRT in terms of how can we explain this really generally to an audience that has never heard about this before? I tell people, imagine the whole population. If we were going to do prevention with the whole population, we would want to include everyone. So the universal way that SBIRT is prevention is by asking everyone at least one question about alcohol use or substance use. That process very quickly addresses the entire population by asking them where and how much they might use a substance. And I'll explain a little bit more in a moment. But what that does is very quickly eliminates the vast majority of the population that very quickly we can identify uses substances or alcohol in a low risk way. And so for them, as I described earlier, by asking them the question alone, that's how they experience SBIRT. For people who respond to the screening process in a way that shows potentially moderate or high risk, we want to ask a few more questions. So we give them another screening tool. And by doing that, we can identify individuals who would benefit from a brief conversation or the very small percentage, like the group you can see on the screen, the 5 to 10% of people that would benefit from a referral to treatment. So to reverse that out, we can ask everyone one question, quickly identify the low risk people. Then we can identify who might be at moderate risk. These are people that wouldn't previously be identified because they don't meet criterion for diagnosis. And then we can quickly assess and determine who might need additional services or follow-up assessment so that we can get them accurately matched with the service that they need. That's what SBIRT is. It's all about very quickly funneling individuals into the most appropriate intervention, whether it's nothing because they're low risk, whether it's a brief conversation because they're in the middle and have moderate risk, or whether they're at high risk level and need additional resources or a referral to treatment. Really, the biggest nuance and difference that is brought about by SBIRT is the definition of what substance use problems are. In previous historical perspectives, we've considered a problem to be addiction. You have a problem when you can't stop using. You have a problem when you experience withdrawal symptoms, for instance. And this, in a way, is seen as the unitary view on alcohol and drug problems. So we have used risky drinking and alcohol abuse as the same terminology. We haven't distinguished those two words. But what we know is that you can actually experience harm without being at the diagnostic level. And so we have to, as a culture, reframe that problems can exist even without being like Homer Simpson and passing out from drinking. Problems and risk can occur even when you don't have hallucinations and experience withdrawal. We know that risk can occur even by binge drinking on a single occasion. Individuals don't have to be at the diagnostic level in order to have risk or experience harm. So we have changed our perspective as preventionists and as treatment providers to broaden the view on alcohol and drug use, and this is the range view. This particular range view is for alcohol use, and there is a range view for substance use as well. I'm going to particularly focus on alcohol use today, since the goal is to share how we can converse with our students and teens on alcohol use. This particular slide focuses on the range view, and in general, this range view is geared towards adults, and I'm going to talk to why this is the adult range view as opposed to adolescent range view, and then I'll show you the adolescent range view in a moment. When it comes to the range view for alcohol use, we know that alcohol is a legal drug. That's why this is the adult perspective. There can be consumption of alcohol without risk of legal consequences. You can consume alcohol in a low-risk way and not have harm. There's also times when you can experience risk for harm without actually having any consequences. For instance, maybe you consume more than the low-risk daily alcohol recommendations. That would be something that I'm going to quiz you in just a moment to see if you know what they are. There also are times when you experience small harms like headaches, hangovers, maybe you sleep in and miss your alarm. That's a harm, and yet it's not necessarily diagnostic. Maybe you go to a tailgate for a sporting event and you consume alcohol and you fall asleep early and you forget to do all of your responsibilities. That would be a small harm, and it wouldn't necessarily require a diagnosis. At the same time, there is a level of consumption that's based on frequency and amount that indicates a severe problem, heavy and binge drinking. And so if we were to measure that in the screening tool, we would likely want to refer someone who is regularly drinking in a binge drinking fashion to services outside of a brief intervention. The difference that we have to pay attention to is that most of the time we do not normally identify individuals in the yellow zone because we haven't ever had terminology or a context to discover individuals in that area. We've only seen people that are at no risk because they don't drink, or high risk because they're diagnostic. So by having a range view of alcohol use, we can broaden the conversation into identifying individuals that are at the moderate or risky level, as well as low risk and high risk. We can think of it as another vital sign, just as we would with blood pressure or obesity or BMI. We can learn about it before it becomes a high-risk condition. In general, we have fewer people that are in the high-risk range than any other level of use. We have 40% of individuals that in the Society of the US don't consume alcohol at all. We have 35% of individuals that consume alcohol in a low-risk way, and about 20% of individuals that consume at the at-risk way or harmful location. Those are the yellow range of risk. And only about 5% of the US society consumes in the high risk way. These are individuals that would meet criterion for diagnosis of a substance use disorder. What we don't have is a mechanism for identifying anything but the dependent level of use. At-risk and harmful consumers are also considered to be problematic drinking. We need to find a way of identifying them, which is how SBIRT comes in. When it comes to youth drinking and youth consumption, the green zone really is only abstinence, because under the age of 21, there is no low-risk consumption. Now, if you were to be watching this from a different country, this might have some nuanced differences, because outside of the US, there is legal consumption of alcohol under the age of 21, of course. And so when I'm speaking with young people, they always say, what about in Germany? And what about in Spain? And this doesn't seem fair. And I say, this is a great conversation. What does it mean to you in terms of the risk factors? And so we take away just the facts and we start to talk about the value systems. When we look at the range of risk for youth, what we have to remember is that we still want to know how many people consume in the low risk range or are abstinent, because that helps us identify what interventions we need. So we have collected this data through the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And what we know is that in age 12 to 15, not everyone drinks, but those people who do, about half of them drink in the moderate range of risk and 50% drink in the high risk range. Of those individuals who consume alcohol age 16 to 18, 30% consume in low risk range, and I'll share what that means. 20% drink in the high risk range, and 50% drink in the moderate risk. And actually, yes, that's correct. On the next slide, you can see that this is how that breaks down in terms of past year drinking. If they responded 16 to 18 and had one or more sips or less than one sip, that would be considered low risk range. 12-year-olds, about 1 in 15 are consuming alcohol. 1 in 4, 14-year-olds, 1 in 2, 16-year-olds, and 2 in every 3, 18-year-olds are consuming alcohol, which is why this is something for us to consider. How can we identify who are the people that are bringing up this information and wanting to have this conversation? It won't be everyone, but it's some of those people that we need to reach. So if we are going to be talking to 12-year-olds, we'll know that it's going to be a much less frequent conversation, only 1 out of every 15 students. But if we're going to be conversing with 18-year-olds that are seniors in high school, it's likely we'll be having this conversation 2 out of 3 times. So it's important to know, beyond how frequent and the prevalence of drinking, why this is important. We want to know exactly what it means to binge drink for this age of consumption. So,
Mallory, sorry, this is Caitlin. We had a question from someone. Wendy asked, where did you say these stats come from?
Yeah, these stats come from the NIAAA, which is the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And so these are based on national statistics on how prevalence looks for adolescents. When we look at national statistics on age of first use, we know that about, let's see, age 14 is the average age across the country. However, you can look at your statewide surveys to see what your local level of age of first use is. I know that I am a parent of an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So when I found out that in my area, the average age of first use is about 12, I thought that I would talk to my son about that, because he's a 5th grader. He's right in that age range where the age of first use might take place. And so I asked him, I said, so I'd like to know if you know anyone that drinks alcohol. And he said, no, Mom, that would be dumb. And I said, that's great. And I said, tell me more. Have you ever thought about drinking alcohol? And he said, no, Mom, I already know you don't want anyone to drink in our house until we're 21. Now, that made me do a little happy dance because, truth be told, even as a preventionist, that doesn't mean that my children are not going to have the same risk and protective factors as any other adolescents. In fact, my kids are known to sing a song that says, "In heaven there is no beer. That's why we drink it here." And that's a scary thing for me. Just because we have a German background and we know that consumption in Germany is looked at culturally differently, I know that my kids hear about drinking alcohol and I have to address it with clear parental guidelines and expectations. This information about estimated binge drinking and level of use also came from the National Institute on Alcohol Use and Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and it shows that when we talk about consumption and binge drinking, it starts to look different in the gender right away. Individuals that are male at birth are considered to be binge drinking from 9 to 13. They report drinking 3 drinks at a time, and these are average standard drinks. Age 14 to 15, binge drinking is considered 4 or more drinks in a given time period, and ages 16 or over, it's considered 5 or more drinks if it's binge drinking reported by young people. So they say, I binge drank. When they binge drink, this is how many they're likely to consume in a single setting. Now, National Institute on Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse defines binge drinking as the number of drinks consumed in a 2-hour period that would elevate your blood alcohol concentration over the legal limit. So for adults, typically that's 3 drinks for women and 4 drinks for men. For adolescents, that biochemistry is much different, and of course, over the drinking limit means any alcohol consumed. But when you're talking with a young person and you use the term binge drinking, it's important to think about what does binge drinking really look like for a young person. And if someone is consuming at the age of 9, if they're drinking 2 or more drinks, it's likely that they're going to be in the red zone of consumption. What we know through SBIRT is that most of the interventions that we have are geared towards young people and adults that are at the high risk range and not so much for the risky and harmful level. So what SBIRT does is it prepares us to have conversations with individuals that are in the moderate range of risk. And that can be really helpful because it alleviates providing referrals to individuals that don't really meet criterion for treatment or aren't likely to respond to treatment because their concerns and risks are not at the level of diagnosis. And it also is empowering for each of you in the schools, or if you're partnering with a school-based health center or with a primary care office, because those tools can be utilized and be highly effective in a short amount of time, as opposed to having the requirement to refer someone out for services and perhaps have a long waiting list. You can do the service yourself and do so in a 15 to 30-minute conversation. I know that it's sometimes the kids that are struggling the most, the young people that are really struggling with severe issues, especially severe abuse of alcohol and substances, that we worry about the most. What we know is that individuals, even in the risky level of use, have consequences in all of these areas, including health problems, mental illness, early academic failure, criminal behavior, violence, and struggling in getting jobs and work, and even experiencing of poverty. We know that about 10% of 8, 10, and 12th graders report binge drinking, according to the 2017 Monitoring the Future data. So that right there shows that more than 10% of the students that we're working with are in that risky level of use potentially. And that gives us a reason to want to have this conversation. We know that 36.7 have had alcohol and 25% have been drunk. in the last year, according to that same 2017 Monitoring the Future data. So there is a significant portion of our students in school that could have this conversation and likely want to have it in the school place because it's the location where most students go on a regular basis. So I'm going to shift gears here. We've really focused on why we want to do SBIRT, and I want to talk a little bit more about what SBIRT really looks like. SBIRT is really a tool. If you look at the crux of it, it's a public health tool that helps you very quickly direct traffic, if you will. And school is a great place to have this experience because, like I said, it's a population level location. Outside of McDonald's and Walmart, I'm not really sure where else we're going to find young people in this mass quantity. So what we want to do is find a way to very quickly determine who needs to have a conversation about risk and who is okay until the next year. Screening and brief intervention is best utilized when it takes place on an entire population and when it takes place on an annual basis. So we start at the beginning of SBIRT by screening. And screening, like I mentioned earlier, is potentially a two-step process. We suggest that there's a two-step process because it'll save time for you to start by asking a pre-screening question of everyone. If you pre-screen everyone, you can very quickly identify the students in your school district that don't consume alcohol at all and therefore are not needing any additional parts of SBIRT. And students who do consume alcohol would then move forward and receive a full screening that would allow us to really place them on the level of risk. The way it looks in adolescent SBIRT is a little bit different than adult SBIRT. For adolescent SBIRT, there's typically 3 pre-screening questions. And if they answer no to all of those, and this is sort of a complicated screen, then commonly schools and healthcare centers that do SBIRT also choose to ask students one follow-up question that is on the craft. If they answer no to that question, you can sort of see the negative path, negative meaning there's no need to continue, then SBIRT is complete. So they would ask the pre-screening question. If they say no, you go to the one question on the craft, and if they say no to that, then they're done for the year. If they answer the pre-screening question and they answer yes to any of those, then they move to the full screening. Or if through the pre-screening process they answer yes to the first question, number C, then they move to the full craft. That seems very convoluted, and it will get a little bit more clear when you see the screening tool. So right here is the craft. This is a screening tool that is the most commonly utilized throughout the country for adolescent SBIRT. Now, I will tell you there are multiple types of screening tools that you can choose to use. And the most important thing in deciding a screening tool is that it's evidence-based, it's research for validity and reliability, and that you feel like it matches with the population that you're working with. The craft has been created by the Boston Children's Hospital and has been utilized by so many organizations that it has been seen as the gold standard for reviewing of SBIRT procedures. One of the great things about the craft is that it goes into more than just alcohol use risk. It also talks about drug risk and also other high-risk behaviors such as riding in cars. So like I described earlier, you would start the pre-screening process with Part A. The question, did you drink any alcohol more than a few sips? Smoke any marijuana or hashish? And you might have to explain what hashish is because most people don't know what it is. You might just say marijuana or hash or any marijuana products, or use anything else to get high. If they answer no to all of those, then they suggest that you move on just to question 1 of Part B. Have you ever ridden in a car driven by someone, including yourself, who was high or had been using alcohol or drugs? This gives you an opportunity to talk about peers and parents and family members that might also be engaging in high-risk behaviors. And if they say no to all of those questions, then they have completed SBIRT for the year and would be seen as low risk. If they answer yes to the Part A, then you move into Part B and ask all of the questions of Part B to determine their score. These are the way the scores work. Once the craft is scored, you can score from a 0 to a 6. If they score a 0, only using Part B, then they are the green zone. If they score in the 1 to 2 range, it's a score that would lead to a brief intervention, and any score of 3 or higher would lead to a referral to treatment. Grace is asking a question. I've read some statistics that even smoking cigarettes and e-cigarettes are indicators of other substance use that could be taken into account. That's absolutely a possibility. You can certainly adjust the pre-screening questions. You can see right here I have the word inconsistent next to Part A, and what we found is that Part A is not as researched. These are some questions that Boston Children's Hospital added that most of the scientific community have accepted, but I've also seen other variations of questions 1 through 3 utilized. And so if in your school district you know that you have a high risk factor for cigarette use, then that's something that you might want to add as a pre-screening question instead of one of these, or might have 4 pre-screening questions. Those things can be modified to meet the needs of your school district. And you might also want to look at your school-based data to determine what risk factors you think are the most strong indicators that would lead to other substance use. Okay, so after you have done the screening, the scores directly tell you what to do next. So if someone scores a 0, then you're going to want to move on to the low risk range, which means education and affirmation. And you can provide the students with brochures and confirm their positive behavior and answer any questions they may have. We have several downloadable resources for you at indianasbirt.org that you can modify and make applicable for the young people that you work with. And Caitlin put that in the chat box for all of you to be able to click on. Just look under resources. The next type of treatment that might come up for young people are brief interventions, and we're going to focus on that next. It's essentially a brief conversation focused on motivating change. In adult SBIRT, there's an option suggesting that's called brief treatment. This typically isn't something that's measured on the craft and isn't always available in school systems unless you're working in a school-based healthcare center where you do have a licensed professional that can provide a brief series of follow-up visits. Or this might be something that your behavioral health provider, school social worker, or school social psychologist can provide. Those are things that you might consider if the brief intervention was successful and the student suggests that they would like follow-up conversations. And a high score of high risk or in the red zone would indicate that someone should follow the referral to treatment procedures. And the referral to treatment process is really still a brief intervention conversation where the focus is geared more towards seeking out services as opposed to lowering risk and changing behavior. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Screening in and of itself is not diagnosis. Diagnosis is not something that SBIRT will ever want to consider the outcome. So if you are the social worker in your school or you're the administrator, just because the student received a high risk range score on the craft, it does not mean that they now need specific services or that they have been diagnosed. What that means is that a referral is needed for them to be assessed and clinically diagnosed by an outside provider. Everyone who scores in the range of moderate to high should be receiving a brief intervention conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, these should be short conversations that focus on change and the barriers to change and really give you an opportunity to converse with the young person about what's important to them. We do so using motivational interviewing instead of just education, because telling people what to do doesn't work. I know that none of you had to drive to come to this training today, or maybe you drove to work today to see this, but the fact of the speed limit typically is not the only thing that influences our driving behaviors. Usually our values are highly influential in the decisions we make, and that can be said for the young people that we work with as well. So we use motivational interviewing, which is an evidence-based communication skill to reduce ambivalence. We use that as a skill instead of just giving people facts and figures to change their mind, because we hope that they will evoke their own arguments for change and talk themselves into changing their risk level for consumption of alcohol and substances. So we've moved really quickly, but I'd like to invite Caitlin to bring up the poll and ask, what aspects of SBIRT so far are you the most comfortable with? Would you say that so far you're not comfortable with any of these? This is also new to me. Perhaps you're interested and feel pretty comfortable about asking open-ended questions and talking about this, using reflections perhaps, or just being present with an empathetic ear. It looks like most of you are already comfortable with something. There's some comfort for everyone, it seems, with perhaps asking questions, and really showing empathy seems to be the area where most of you are feeling most comfortable. Some of you are saying that reflections feel comfortable. That's an area of motivational interviewing, as also is open-ended questions. And for those of you where this feels really still new and uncomfortable, that is okay, because learning a new skill takes a lot of time and can take a lot of energy and practice. So it makes sense if you are still figuring out how to find a comfort zone. We had about 52% of you saying empathy was where you feel the most comfortable, 35% of you saying open-ended questions. 6% of you said reflections were comfortable, and the rest of you said, this is all new to me. For those of you that haven't ever had an SBIRT conversation or are new to motivational interviewing, these 4 steps will be your guidelines. Establish rapport, give thoughts and feedback, enhance motivation, and negotiate a plan. These are the ways that we make this a comfortable conversation for everyone, and we use the framework of motivational interviewing as our background. We want to be empathetic, we want to be equals, we want to use a very welcoming attitude when we follow this 4-step process. When we do use education, this is an example of the document that we've prepared that we will share with you. We try and keep information quick, short, and simple. We don't want to overwhelm students with facts and figures. And I'd like to share with you a video example of SBIRT and how this might look with a student.
Jacob is a 14-year-old boy presenting for a sports physical exam. He completed the CRAFT screening tool and answered yes to the relax question. The physician has completed the physical exam.
So Jacob, everything looks very normal on your physical exam. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay. I see that you filled out our alcohol and drug questionnaire. Is it okay if we go through this together?
Sure.
Okay. What we talk about is confidential. I only tell your parents about what we say if you give your permission or if I become worried about a danger to you or to someone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a look. So I see that you have marked that you sometimes use alcohol and that you have used alcohol to relax, feel better about yourself, or fit in. Do you mind telling me a little bit more about your alcohol use?
It's not a big deal. Sometimes with my friends, we'll drink a few beers and when we're hanging out or when we're at a party, and sometimes rum and cokes.
Okay, so how many do you usually have at a time?
3 or 4 probably. I don't keep track.
Okay. And how often?
Probably about once or twice a month.
Okay. So you drink with friends, sort of 3 or 4 beers or mixed drinks 1 or 2 times a month. How long have you been doing that?
Probably since last October.
So for about 6 months. I'm curious, what do you like about drinking alcohol?
What do I like about it?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just fun to drink with my friends. Like when we're at a party at someone else's house and we're drinking with other people that we don't know. It tastes good.
Okay. So it sounds like you feel relaxed and have fun when you're drinking with friends, and you like the taste.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm also curious, are there any parts about your alcohol use that you don't like?
I don't like when I get sick in the mornings because of hangovers and when I start throwing up, and I don't like that.
Have you ever experienced a blackout, like when you've been drinking and you wake up and you don't remember what happened?
No, but that happened to someone I know, though.
And have you had any problems related to your drinking alcohol, like at home or school or somewhere else?
One time I missed first period at school because I had a hangover and I was late getting up. And Mom got mad at me because I wouldn't get out of bed, and she said she knew I had a hangover.
Have you told your mother that you drink with your friends?
No, but I got grounded for 2 weeks after that.
So more negative things about your drinking, like getting into trouble with your mom and missing a class at school when you had a hangover?
Yeah, but I only missed school once.
Okay. I see on the questionnaire that you have not ridden in a car with someone who's been drinking, and you haven't driven a car after you've been drinking. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's great, and I hope you continue to avoid those things. As your doctor, I want you to know that I'm concerned about your drinking. When teens drink, things can go wrong, like injuring yourself. Even when you don't drink to excess, though, your brain is still developing and is very sensitive to the effects of alcohol.
Okay.
That's why I recommend that all my adolescent patients not drink at all. So if you were to think today about how ready you feel to stop drinking alcohol on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 not being ready at all and 10 feeling very ready, what number would you pick?
Probably a 5.
A 5. So I'm curious, why didn't you pick a lower number, like a 2 or a 3, that would mean you're only a little bit ready to stop drinking?
Well, I guess I'm just tired of getting in trouble.
Okay. What could you do to avoid getting into trouble?
Not drink?
Have you ever tried not drinking or stopping drinking?
No, not really.
What some people your age do is try stopping drinking for a period of time just to see what that feels like.
I could probably do that.
So how long do you think you could go without drinking?
I don't know.
Do you think you could go 2 months without drinking?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. What things would make it easier for you to not drink?
I could probably drink something else when my friends start drinking, like just Coke.
Anything else to make things easier for you?
I could probably hang out with some of my friends who don't drink. We're inviting them to parties and having fun, because not everyone drinks at parties.
Okay. Is there anybody in your life that you can talk to about this who'll give you some support for not drinking?
Yeah, my friends who don't drink would probably be happy that I'm not drinking either, and they'd support me.
Great. So you've come up with some reasons to stop drinking, like having hangovers and throwing up and getting into trouble. And you've developed some strategies to try to not drink, like spending more time with friends who don't drink or having non-alcoholic drinks when people around you are drinking alcohol. I think that's a great plan. I'm really proud of you for giving this a try. How about if I have you make an appointment for 2 months from now, and then I'll see you back and we can see how things are going.
Okay.
All right, so you can see that this example was made by the SBIRT project in the state of Oregon, and so they also have some additional resources should you be interested in looking for additional examples. What I try and remind everyone all the time when I'm training on SBIRT is that every brief intervention has things that you might be able to steal from and use yourself, and there may be things that don't quite fit for your own style. Some people that are behavioral health professionals do SBIRT brief interventions slightly different than physicians. And depending on where in your school district you can see SBIRT fitting, you might have a different approach to the brief intervention. And really what I wanted to demonstrate here is that the 4-step process is consistent, and it always starts with building a little bit of rapport and then communicating the results and talking about what those results mean and enhancing motivation and talking about barriers, and then moving into what a plan might look like. When it comes to brief interventions and screening and referral to treatment, what we want to remember is that referral is only one of multiple outcomes of SBIRT. Yes, the referral piece is what many people hear at the end and what a lot of people think is the expectation. The biggest thing that we want to do in SBIRT is have conversations with young men, just like that example, that are in the yellow zone, because those are the individuals that we can make the most impact on, and we can also influence by supporting those individuals that do need more high-risk support. Referrals can also be referrals to prevention programs. So if you're working with your local coalition in your school, you might consider, are there referrals for family programs that would also aid in supporting students that do need support outside of the school? So consider more than just treatment when you think about referrals. I know that many of you come through actual schools that you're a part of, and perhaps you're a partner of a school, whether you are a primary care provider, a mental health provider, or a member of an educational system. SBIRT could be utilized in many different places. And we know that this takes place. It's a matter of using services so that we can very successfully support the young people in our communities. Schools are one of the biggest referral sources for substance abuse treatment facilities. You can see right here, based on 2008 treatment episode data, schools provided a significant number of referrals on a daily basis throughout the country. Here, they're the 4th highest number of referrals. And we want to see schools actively involved in the referral process. This might come through school nursing centers, school-based health centers. It might be through the counseling office. It might be referred because you're experiencing SBIRT through adolescent physicals, or maybe it's embedded into site and BMI checks. Wherever it experiences, where the experience for SBIRT fits best is where you want to fold it into your school district. So I would like to ask you, Caitlin, if you could bring up poll number 3. Where do you see SBIRT fitting best in your school system? Do you see SBIRT fitting best in a place such as your school-based healthcare center? Do you see it fitting in well with your annual physicals for students that are in activities or athletes? Do you see it embedded into BMI or hearing testing procedures, or maybe even embedded in the online registration system for students who will be required to fill out paperwork? Perhaps it could be embedded in your online system to do the screening and then follow up conversations once they come to school. So many of you are referring or clicking on school-based health centers, and some of you are thinking about annual physicals, or perhaps even embedding it into the registration system. All of these are options. It looks like our highest response rates are both in school-based healthcare centers and potentially into the registration process. So when you do utilize this in a school-based healthcare center, the most important thing that you do is try and have it embedded in a way that's universal. So every student that is seen in the healthcare center receives the screening service. And this often starts in the middle school range, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. It's a great time to start. If you are going to do this as a part of registration system, one of the important things to think about is how do you already engage your students in the registration process, or is it typically the parental figures or guardians that are filling out paperwork? It can be a great opportunity to engage your students when they come on campus to do their scheduling, or to have them fill out some additional paperwork through your school computers. And that can have some benefits because it doesn't feel quite as nerve-wracking as answering the question face-to-face. One of the benefits of doing this with physicals is that it's very easily tied into a process that your students are used to, and they're used to getting screening for lots of different procedures and practices. And that's another reason why integrating it into BMI and hearing testing goes very well, because you can very quickly do this across your entire population and embed the use of outside nursing staff or your social work staff for like a 2-week period, for instance, to do all of those things at one time, so that you don't have to have the process go on a daily basis throughout the whole school year. So there's benefits to embedding it into different aspects of your school district. What I would recommend is that you sit down with your partners in your school district and decide, where does it fit best? Where does the process of SBIRT seem to be the easiest? If you do that, then you're likely to see successful outcomes, and those look like a reduction of use that also contribute to reduction of high-risk behaviors. Most of these outcomes are geared towards adults, but you also see better school engagement. You also see higher academic success and opportunities to communicate within your school to reduce the likelihood of development of substance use issues. And so I know that we're nearing the end of our time together, and so I want to give an opportunity for questions and answers. Feel free to reach out to me if you do have ongoing questions. I'd be happy to respond to them. And it seems like we have a question here. If a child comes into school under the influence, but the nurse has okayed the student to return to class, how best to intervene? SBIRT discipline, it's not clear. Well, I first would suggest that you refer to your district level policies, because that's always where I suggest you go first. And if you can modify policies to address what level of consumption they experience on an annual or on a regular basis, that would be my first issue. Students typically cannot learn when they are under the influence of a substance. So it is a very important balancing act to determine if the student is better off returning home to no longer be under the substance, or if they should stay in school until they are no longer under the influence of the substance. That is a complicated question that I think we could go into a whole webinar, actually. Are there other questions that I might be able to help with? I have about 1 more minute before we have to close. Should you have ongoing questions, I know that this was a very quick webinar, please feel free to touch base with your American School Health Association, and they can pass their questions on to me, and I can follow up with questions. And if you would like to hear more on SBIRT, feel free to go to the Indiana SBIRT website, and or let them know if you would like a follow-up webinar for the American School Health Association. I know that you have some upcoming webinars. Would you like to refer us to all of those, Deetra?
Yes, be glad to. Thank you very much, Mallory. We do appreciate your information. It was very educational, and I'm sure people will be sharing it with a lot of people in the next couple of days. In June, we have the gun violence webinar coming up. In July, the Green School Project. September is the National Professional Development Standards in Sexuality Education. We encourage you to see basically the webinars advertised on the American School Health Association website. For continuing education for members and non-members, basically you'll see the information on the screen. If you're a member, it's free for the CEUs. If you're a non-member, you can see you may purchase it for $30 per hour. All CEUs may be obtained by completing the webinar evaluation, which will be following, and downloading the CEU through the ASHA store, and that information will be on the email that you should be receiving. Caitlin, do you have any information in regards to the CEUs you want to share?
I would just say please go ahead and fill out the evaluation. I've posted that link in the chat box. That's where if you do want CEUs, you can fill out the information there as far as what type of CEUs you want to receive. And again, if you're not catching all this, I will be sending out an email within the next couple of days with resources such as the slides, the recording, as well as the evaluation link again, just in case you don't have a chance to fill it out.
Okay, and today's webinar is just a little taste of what you'll see and hear and be involved with if you attend the 92nd Annual Conference of ASHA at Indianapolis, Indiana, October 4th to the 6th, 2018. If you're not an ASHA member, we encourage you to become an ASHA member. We wish you all a great day and a fantastic summer. And thank you again, Mallory.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Mallory, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Bye, everyone. Have a great summer.